The screaming started before I even made it through the church doors. Not celebratory screams, the razor-sharp kind that slice through polite conversation and freeze everyone mid-smile. "What are you doing here?" My daughter's voice carried across the vestibule like a whip crack. Her face was flushed beneath her veil, eyes narrowed to slits. "I told you not to come. Leave. Now." The guests turned to stare, champagne glasses suspended in midair, mouths forming perfect little O's of shock. I stood there in my carefully pressed dress, the blue one I'd saved for special occasions, feeling my legs go weak. The fabric suddenly felt too tight around my ribs, constricting my breath. I could smell the lilies from the arrangements. Their cloying sweetness, mixing with expensive perfume and the faint mustiness of the old church. Every detail burned itself into my memory with cruel clarity. The way the afternoon light filtered through stained glass windows, painting Amanda's white dress in patches of crimson and gold. The way her bridesmaids clustered behind her like a wall of pastel-colored solidarity. The way Michael stood near the altar, his face carefully blank, refusing to meet my eyes. This was supposed to be a reconciliation. She'd sent me the invitation 3 weeks ago, hadn't she? Or had I imagined that too? I'd held that cream-colored envelope in my trembling hands, read the elegant calligraphy over and over. "Mr. and Mrs. Richard Chen request the honor of your presence." Except Richard hadn't been lucid enough to request anything in months. But I'd convinced myself it meant something. That maybe, finally, Amanda was ready to forgive me for whatever unnamed crime had earned her rage. I'd spent 2 weeks' worth of grocery money on this dress, had my hair done at a salon for the first time in a year, put on the pearl earrings Richard had given me for our 20th anniversary, back when he still remembered our anniversary existed. The maid of honor rushed forward, gripping my daughter's elbow, whispering frantically. I caught fragments, "making a scene," and "not worth it," and "guests are watching." But my daughter just shook her off, her arm jerking free with enough force to make her bouquet tremble. White roses and baby's breath. I'd taught her to love white roses. When she was 7, we'd planted a rose bush together in the backyard of the house on Maple Street, and she'd named it Snowflake. That bush had bloomed every spring for 20 years until Amanda had the estate sale company rip it out before showing the house. "Get out of my wedding." The words landed like stones in my chest. Each syllable was enunciated with perfect clarity, designed to carry to the back pews where I could see phones being raised to record this moment. My humiliation was about to go viral. Some part of me, the part that still remembered being a person who commanded respect, wanted to defend myself, to ask why, to demand an explanation in front of all these witnesses. But the larger part, the part that had been ground down by months of gaslighting and betrayal, just wanted to disappear. I turned and walked back through those heavy oak doors, my shoes clicking against marble that suddenly felt like ice. Each step echoed in the sudden silence, like a countdown to some inevitable ending. I kept my spine straight through sheer force of will, even though I wanted to collapse right there on the floor. The spring sunshine outside seemed obscene, too bright, too cheerful for what had just happened. Birds were singing in the trees, traffic hummed past on the street. The world was continuing like nothing had shattered, like I hadn't just been publicly eviscerated by my own daughter in front of 100 strangers. I made it to my car before the shaking started. My hands fumbled with the keys, dropping them twice before I managed to unlock the door. I sat in the driver's seat of my 15-year-old Honda, the one thing Amanda hadn't managed to take from me, and stared at the church's facade. Gothic revival architecture, all pointed arches and rose windows, beautiful and cold, just like my daughter had become. The invitation was still in my purse. I pulled it out with shaking fingers and read it again, looking for the detail I must have missed. Some fine print that said, "Everyone except the mother of the bride." But there was nothing, just my name, handwritten in Amanda's careful script. Margaret Chen, requested at 3 o'clock for the wedding of Amanda Marie Chen, to Bradley Harrison Cooper III. I checked the date. Today. I checked the time. 3:15. I hadn't imagined it. She had invited me, and then she'd humiliated me for accepting. That's when I understood. This had been intentional, not a miscommunication or a misunderstanding. Amanda had invited me specifically so she could reject me in public, could demonstrate her power over me in front of everyone who mattered to her. It was a performance, carefully choreographed cruelty designed to prove that she'd won, that she'd taken everything, my home, my savings, my dignity, and there was nothing I could do about it. I sat in that parking lot for 45 minutes, watching guests file into the church until the ceremony started and I was sure no one would see me crying in my car. 3 months earlier, I was still living in the house on Maple Street, the one Richard and I had bought 42 years ago, when houses in Phoenix still had reasonable price tags and neighborhoods felt like communities. The walls held our entire lives, scuff marks from when the kids learned to ride bikes in the hallway, that water stain on the ceiling from the time the upstairs toilet overflowed, the notches on the doorframe tracking each child's height year by year. I ran my fingers over those notches sometimes, remembering. Amanda, age 5, 3 feet 2 inches. She'd been so proud of growing, had insisted on being measured every month even though the changes were barely visible. Michael, age 8, 4 feet 5 inches. He'd complained that Amanda got measured more often, that it wasn't fair. Such ordinary concerns, such innocent problems. The kitchen still smelled like the cinnamon rolls I'd made every Sunday for decades. The scent had seeped into the walls, into the grout between the tiles, permanent as memory. Richard used to joke that he could find his way home blindfolded just by following the smell of yeast and cinnamon. Now Richard couldn't find his way home at all. Richard couldn't remember any of it anymore. Dementia had eaten through his memories like acid, leaving only scattered fragments that surfaced at random. Some days, he knew my name. Most days, I was just the nice lady who makes breakfast. The doctor said it would only get worse. They'd explained it to me in that careful, clinical way doctors have when they're delivering unbearable news. Progressive cognitive decline, irreversible neurodegeneration, expected survival time of 7 to 10 years from diagnosis, though quality of life would deteriorate significantly within the first 2 to 3. I'd been managing, barely. The medications alone were a part-time job. 7 pills in the morning, 4 at lunch, 6 at dinner, 3 before bed. Each one color-coded and scheduled, each one with its own list of side effects and interactions. I'd set up a system using a weekly pill organizer and phone alarms. But Richard had started hiding the pills, convinced I was trying to poison him. I'd found them tucked inside his shoes, buried in the bathroom trash, dissolved in the toilet bowl. Then there were the appointments. Neurologist every month. Primary care physician every 2 weeks. Physical therapy twice a week to maintain mobility. Occupational therapy once a week to preserve daily living skills. Each appointment required planning, making sure Richard was bathed and dressed, that he'd eaten but not too much in case they needed blood work, that I had all his current medications listed and his insurance cards ready. And every appointment ended the same way, with some variation of continue current treatment plan, or let's adjust the dosage, or unfortunately, there's nothing more we can do. The finances were a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. Our insurance covered 80% of most things, which sounds generous until you realize that 20% of tens of thousands of dollars is still thousands of dollars. The co-pays alone ran $300 a month. The medications Richard's insurance wouldn't cover, the newer ones the doctors thought might slow his decline, cost $800 every 30 days. We'd burned through our savings in the first year. The second year, I'd taken out a reverse mortgage, something I'd sworn I'd never do. By the third year, I was selling things. Small things at first. Richard's golf clubs. He hadn't played in 2 years and didn't remember the sport existed. My mother's silver tea service, tarnished from decades in a cabinet, but still worth something to a collector. Books, old electronics, clothes we didn't wear. I held a garage sale and made $400, watching strangers haggle over items that held entire chapters of our lives. A man bought Richard's record collection for $50, hundreds of vintage jazz albums Richard had spent 40 years collecting. $50. I wanted to scream that they were worth more, that each one represented a moment in our history. But I needed the money more than I needed the memories. Richard had started wandering at night, and I'd taken to sleeping in 2-hour shifts, terrified he'd walk out into traffic or forget how to come home. I'd wake to the sound of the front door opening, my heart already racing, and find him on the porch in his pajamas, looking confused about where he was trying to go. Once I found him 3 blocks away at 2 a.m, knocking on a stranger's door because he thought it was our house from 1985. The police brought him home that time, kind but firm in their suggestion that maybe he needed more structured care. I installed locks he couldn't figure out, alarms that chimed when doors opened, a GPS tracker in his shoe in case he made it outside without me noticing. Our home became a prison designed to keep him safe, and I became the warden who never slept, always listening for the sound of escape. The bills were piling up, medical expenses our insurance barely touched, home repairs I couldn't afford, property taxes that seemed to double every year. The roof had started leaking in the guest bedroom. The water heater was making ominous clanking sounds. The foundation had cracks I couldn't ignore anymore. Each problem was hundreds or thousands of dollars I didn't have. I started letting things go. The leak could wait. I just put a bucket under it and emptied it twice a day. The water heater would last another year, probably. The foundation cracks were probably just settling, nothing structural. I became an expert at probably and maybe, and it'll be fine for now. When I was too foggy to fully process the documents Amanda and Michael brought, I couldn't see what was happening. Exhaustion has a way of making bad decisions seem reasonable. When you're running on 4 hours of sleep stitched together from 15-minute intervals, when you've been solving crisis after crisis for years with no help, when someone offers to take even a small portion of the burden, you want to say yes. You want to believe in help. "Mom, we need to talk about Dad's care," Amanda said, settling onto the living room couch like she owned it. She was wearing her work clothes, pressed slacks and a silk blouse, jewelry that looked expensive. She'd done well for herself, my daughter. Dental hygienist at a high-end practice in Scottsdale. Good money, good benefits, no student loans because Richard and I had paid for her education. We'd been so proud. Michael stood by the window, hands in his pockets, nodding along. He was wearing a suit, fresh from whatever lawyer thing he'd been doing. Michael had always been the easier child, the people-pleaser, the one who went along to avoid conflict. Amanda was the force of nature, the one who knew what she wanted and took it. They'd always made a good team, my children. I just hadn't realized until too late that I might end up on the opposing side. "This is too much for you to handle alone," Amanda continued, her voice dripping with concern that should have set off alarm bells. "The medications, the appointments, the finances, it's overwhelming." She wasn't wrong about that part. I was exhausted down to my bones, the kind of tired that sleep doesn't fix. The kind of tired that makes you forget words mid-sentence, that has you putting milk in the pantry and cereal in the refrigerator, that leaves you crying in the shower because it's the only place Richard can't hear you break. "We've been worried about you," Michael added, finally turning from the window to look at me with those soft brown eyes that had convinced me to let him have a puppy when he was 8, to extend his curfew when he was 16, to co-sign on his first apartment when he was 22. "You've lost weight, Mom. When's the last time you slept through the night? When's the last time you did something for yourself?" I couldn't remember. The question itself felt absurd, like asking when I'd last vacationed on Mars. Doing things for myself was a luxury from a previous life, before Richard's diagnosis had turned everything into a series of emergencies and obligations. "We want to help," Michael said, his voice gentle in that way that makes you want to trust him. "We've been talking to a lawyer, just to explore options, to understand what resources might be available. and there are some legal arrangements that could make things easier for everyone. Amanda pulled out a folder, the kind with a law firm's name embossed in gold on the front. Inside were documents, so many documents, each one flagged with colored tabs marked, "Sign here." "If you sign power of attorney over to Amanda, she can manage Dad's care while you focus on being his wife instead of his administrator," Michael explained, sitting down next to me on the couch. Close enough that I could smell his cologne, the same brand Richard used to wear. Was that intentional? A calculated move to make me more comfortable, more trusting? "Power of attorney just means I can handle the paperwork," Amanda said, spreading the documents across the coffee table. "Pay the bills, talk to the doctors, manage the insurance claims, all the administrative headaches that are wearing you down. You'll still make the important decisions about Dad's care. This just lets me handle the logistics." It sounded reasonable. Logical, even. I was drowning in logistics, in phone calls with insurance companies that kept me on hold for 45 minutes only to tell me they needed different documentation. In medical bills that came with codes I didn't understand, demanding payment for services I didn't remember approving. In financial statements showing accounts draining faster than I could track. "Is this temporary?" I asked, my voice hoarse from exhaustion. "I mean, what if I want to take back control later?" "Of course it's temporary," Amanda assured me, her hand covering mine. Her skin was soft, moisturized. Mine was dry and papery, aged a decade in the 3 years since Richard's diagnosis. "You can revoke it any time. This is just to help you right now while you're overwhelmed. Think of it like when you let me help with the dishes when I was a kid. You're not giving up your kitchen, just accepting help with the cleanup." The metaphor was comforting. Dishwashing, simple, temporary, revocable. Not the legal transfer of control over everything Richard and I had built in 42 years of marriage. They showed me where to sign. Here and here and here, initial here, date here. Michael witnessed my signature, his handwriting neat and legal on the line marked, "Witness." Amanda smiled at me, squeezed my hand, told me I was doing the right thing. "This is going to make everything so much easier, Mom. You'll see. Now you can just focus on taking care of Dad and yourself. Let me handle the rest." That was my first mistake, though I wouldn't understand it for weeks. I believed them because I wanted to believe them. Because the alternative, that my children might be manipulating me, might have ulterior motives, was too horrible to consider. You don't spend 28 years raising children, bandaging their scrapes and celebrating their victories, only to suspect them of cruelty. You don't teach someone to walk and talk and read and dream, and then imagine they might grow up to steal from you. I told myself the tension I felt was just stress manifesting as paranoia. Richard was getting worse. Some mornings he thought I was his mother. Other times, a stranger breaking into his house. The strain was making me see shadows where there were none. But the shadows were real. I just couldn't see them yet, because I was too busy drowning in the logistics Amanda had promised to handle. And she did handle them. All of them. Every single one, until I had no idea what was happening with our money, our property, our lives. When Amanda started making decisions without consulting me, I convinced myself it was efficiency, not control. She arranged for a new neurologist. Fine. Maybe his current one wasn't aggressive enough with treatment. The first neurologist, Dr. Patterson, had been treating Richard since his diagnosis. He knew Richard's history, understood the progression of his disease, had been cautious and thorough in his approach. The new doctor, someone I'd never met before the first appointment, seemed younger, more rushed. He changed half of Richard's medications in the first visit. "Dr. Chen, these new protocols show real promise," he'd said, barely looking up from his laptop. "We're seeing patients maintain cognitive function longer with this combination." I wanted to ask questions. Why these specific medications? What were the side effects? How did they interact with Richard's other conditions, his high blood pressure, his thyroid issues? But Amanda was there, nodding along, taking notes, asking the questions I couldn't formulate through my exhaustion. She seemed to have everything under control. I let her have it. She switched his medications. Okay, perhaps the new ones had better outcomes. Though Richard seemed more agitated after the change, more prone to angry outbursts and confusion. When I mentioned this to Amanda, she brushed it off. The doctor said there might be an adjustment period. Give it time, Mom. She started handling all the bills. Well, I'd been drowning in paperwork anyway. The relief of not having to wade through medical statements and insurance explanations was immediate and intoxicating. For the first time in months, I wasn't spending 3 hours a day on the phone with billing departments, wasn't opening envelopes with trembling hands, wondering which catastrophic expense had arrived now. Each small surrender felt like relief at the time. Someone else was carrying the weight. Someone else was making the hard calls. I was just too exhausted to see what was really happening. The thing about control is that you rarely notice it slipping away. It doesn't announce itself with dramatic gestures. It's subtle, incremental, a series of small concessions that seem individually reasonable but collectively add up to complete dispossession. Amanda started coming by every day to help, which meant she'd check the mail before I could, sort through everything, take what she deemed important. Just bills, Mom. I'll handle them. You don't need to worry about this. She set up online banking access for all our accounts, so I can pay things directly instead of bothering you for checks, more efficient this way. She became the point person for all Richard's care providers. The doctors started calling her instead of me with updates and questions. Your daughter said you were having trouble hearing on the phone, one nurse explained when I asked why. She asked us to go through her for medical updates. I wasn't having trouble hearing, but by the time I realized this was a lie, Amanda had already established herself as Richard's primary contact with every provider, every pharmacy, every medical supply company. I'd been written out of my husband's care without even realizing it was happening. The isolation was so gradual, I didn't recognize it as intentional. Friends who used to call started dropping away. Later, I learned Amanda had told them I was too overwhelmed for visitors and asked them to give me space. My sister in California stopped her weekly calls. Amanda had told her I found them stressful, that I needed to focus on Richard without distractions. One by one, the connections to my outside life were severed, always with plausible explanations, always supposedly for my own good. I was being pruned like a tree, cut back to nothing but the trunk, stripped of every branch that might have offered support or perspective. The house was the thing I should have fought harder to keep. Amanda brought it up on a Tuesday afternoon, her voice dripping with false sympathy. I remember the exact day because it was the anniversary of my mother's death, and I'd been feeling particularly vulnerable, particularly aware of mortality and loss. Mom, this place is too much. She gestured around the living room like it was a condemned building instead of the home where she'd grown up. The yard needs work. The roof is 20 years old. The foundation has cracks. You're spending money you don't have trying to maintain it. I'd noticed the cracks. Sure. Hairline fractures spreading across the basement walls like river systems on a map. The structural engineer I'd called had said they were cosmetic, nothing to worry about yet. But Amanda had gotten a second opinion from someone she knew, and suddenly they were catastrophic, dangerous, requiring immediate and expensive intervention. You can't afford to fix this place properly, she continued, pulling out printouts with cost estimates. $30,000 for foundation repair, $15,000 for a new roof, $8,000 for the HVAC system that was on its last legs. Numbers that seemed impossibly large, deliberately overwhelming. And what happens if Dad needs to go into memory care? Michael added, tag-teaming me the way they used to when they wanted to stay up late or get a new video game console. Those facilities cost $6,000 to $8,000 a month. The money tied up in this house could pay for years of quality care. But this was our home. Every room held ghosts of better days. The kitchen where I'd taught Amanda to make pie crust. Richard critiquing our technique while sneaking bites of raw dough. His commentary had been gentle, instructive, full of the patience he'd shown in everything before the disease took that away. More butter, Mandy. Don't be afraid of the butter. That's what makes it flaky. The backyard where Michael had his 8th birthday party, 20 kids running wild with water balloons. Richard had set up an elaborate obstacle course, spent the whole afternoon being a human jungle gym, came inside afterward with grass stains on his knees and the biggest smile I'd ever seen. Best day ever, he'd said that night, collapsing into bed. Can we have 8 kids? The bedroom where Richard and I had whispered our plans for retirement, traveling to national parks, finally learning to ballroom dance, growing old together with grace. We'd painted that room 3 times over the years, from the cheerful yellow of our early marriage to the sage green of middle age to the soft blue of our retirement years. Each color a different era, a different version of ourselves. We should sell, Amanda said, pulling out printouts from real estate websites. The market's good right now. You could move somewhere smaller, more manageable. Use the equity for Dad's care. She had listings ready, had already done the research. 3-bedroom houses in Phoenix going for $400,000, sometimes more. Ours would sell fast, she assured me. Good neighborhood, decent size lot. Bones of the house were solid, even if the cosmetic stuff needed work. She made it sound like wisdom, like love, like the only reasonable choice for someone in my position. And maybe it was. Maybe I really couldn't afford to keep the house, couldn't manage the maintenance, couldn't justify keeping all that equity locked up when Richard needed expensive care. But the speed at which she pushed, the pressure she applied, the way she dismissed every hesitation I voiced, those should have been warnings. I was too tired to argue, too overwhelmed to see the trap closing around me. Amanda had an answer for every objection, a solution for every concern, a reason why waiting would be catastrophic. The foundation would collapse, the roof would cave in. The money would run out and Richard would end up in some state-run facility that smelled like urine and despair. Let me handle this for you, Mom. That's why you gave me power of attorney, remember? So I could manage the hard stuff while you focus on Dad. The heirlooms went first. My grandmother's china, Richard's father's pocket watch collection, the antique furniture we'd inherited and restored over decades. We need to declutter before showing the house, Amanda explained, hiring an estate sale company that whisked everything away in a weekend. I watched strangers cart off pieces of our history, paying pennies for things that held entire stories. The oak dining table where we'd hosted every Thanksgiving for 30 years sold for $300. I'd polished that table every week, rubbed oil into the wood to keep it from drying out, repaired the scratches and water rings with careful attention. $300. My mother's jewelry box, the one inlaid with mother of pearl, the one that played Clair de Lune when you opened it, went for $75. My mother had given it to me on my wedding day. For your treasures, she'd said. Every woman needs a place to keep her treasures. I'd kept my most precious things in that box, not just jewelry, but love letters from Richard, hospital bracelets from when each child was born, a dried flower from my wedding bouquet. The estate sale people had cleaned it out, thrown away the junk, sold just the box. Richard's father's pocket watches were his pride. He'd collected them for 50 years, researching each piece, learning its history, caring for the delicate mechanisms with the attention of a jeweler. 17 watches in total, some dating back to the 1800s. The estate sale listed them as a lot, sold them all together for $450. Richard's father had paid more than that for some of the individual pieces. I felt like I was watching my life get dismantled piece by piece. But I stayed quiet because I thought this was helping. I thought this was necessary. Amanda kept saying, "We need to, and this will help, and it's for the best." And I wanted so desperately to believe her that I ignored the sick feeling in my stomach. The day of the estate sale, I couldn't stay. I got in my car and drove aimlessly around Phoenix, avoiding the house until Amanda texted me that it was over. When I came home, the house was empty. Not just decluttered, gutted. Rooms I'd filled with life and memory stood bare, echoing with absence. Even things I hadn't agreed to sell were gone. The bookshelf Richard had built when we first moved in. The rocking chair where I'd nursed both babies. The framed photos from the hallway, our wedding, the kids' school pictures, family vacations spanning 4 decades. "Where are the photos?" I asked Amanda, my voice thin and strange. The frames were old and didn't match. "I saved the pictures. They're in a box somewhere. We can get new frames once you're settled in the new place." I never saw that box. Never saw those pictures again. Our history had been edited, curated down to whatever fit Amanda's narrative of necessary simplification. The house sold in 2 weeks. Amanda handled everything, the inspections, the negotiations, the closing. I signed more papers, too many to count, trusting that she was protecting my interests. The lawyer at the closing asked me if I understood what I was signing, if I was doing this voluntarily, if I had any questions. Amanda answered for me before I could speak. "Mom understands. We've gone over everything thoroughly. She's just tired. This has been a long process. The money from the sale went into accounts I couldn't access, managed through the power of attorney I'd so foolishly granted." "Don't worry," Amanda assured me, showing me statements I barely understood. "It's all being invested properly for Dad's long-term care. See? This account is for medical expenses, this one is for living expenses, this one is the reserve fund. Everything's organized and safe." The numbers on the statements looked right. $430,000 from the house sale, minus the real estate commissions and closing costs. But I couldn't touch it, couldn't transfer it, couldn't even log in to check the balances without Amanda's permission. I'd been made financially invisible, dependent on my daughter's goodwill for access to my own money. She moved us into a small assisted living apartment, 1 room with a kitchenette and a bathroom barely big enough to turn around in. The place smelled like disinfectant and boiled vegetables, and the walls were thin enough that I could hear the couple next door arguing every night. Richard hated it, or as much as he could hate anything in his diminished state. He kept asking when we were going home, and I had no answer that made sense. "This is home now," I'd say, but the words felt like lies. Home was the house on Maple Street. Home was 42 years of memories layered on top of each other like archaeological strata. This was just a room where we waited for worse things to happen. I'd sacrificed our home, our possessions, our independence, all because I believed my children when they said it was for the best. That belief was the chain that kept me docile, even as everything I'd built crumbled around me. I look back now and wonder how I could have been so blind. But you have to understand, when you're drowning, you grab whatever lifeline appears, even if it's made of razor wire. The truth cracked open at a family gathering I wasn't supposed to attend. Amanda's future mother-in-law was hosting a pre-wedding brunch, one of those genteel affairs with finger sandwiches and mimosas served in crystal flutes. The kind of event where everyone dresses carefully and speaks in modulated tones and pretends their lives are perfect. I wasn't invited, but Richard's sister Diane insisted on bringing me along. Diane had always been formidable, the kind of woman who commanded rooms without raising her voice. She was a retired judge, used to cutting through evasion and seeing the truth beneath polite fictions. "Families should be together," she'd said firmly when Amanda tried to protest over the phone. I was sitting right there when the call came, could hear Amanda's voice rising with objection, could see Diane's expression harden with each excuse. "She's too tired for social events. Then she can rest at the party. There's a comfortable sitting room. She doesn't have anything appropriate to wear. I'll take her shopping. What's your real objection, Amanda?" Silence on the other end. Then, "Fine, but don't let her embarrass herself." The comment stung, though I couldn't articulate exactly why. When had I become someone who might embarrass myself? I'd hosted dinner parties for Richard's business colleagues, chaired the PTA, volunteered at the library fundraiser every year. I knew how to behave in polite company. But when I looked in the mirror the morning of the brunch, I understood Amanda's concern. I looked like someone's poor relation. My best dress was 5 years old and hung loose on my frame. I'd lost 20 pounds in the months since moving into the assisted living facility. My shoes were scuffed, my purse had a broken clasp. Diane took one look at me and drove us to Nordstrom. "We're getting you something new," she said, brooking no argument. "My treat." She bought me a dress, simple, elegant, navy blue with a flattering cut, new shoes, a handbag that closed properly. She even insisted on taking me to the salon, where they did something to my hair that made it look intentional instead of merely gray. When we arrived at the brunch, I felt almost human again. Almost like the person I used to be before exhaustion and betrayal had worn me down to nothing. The house was beautiful. A sprawling estate in Paradise Valley with mountain views and a garden that probably required a full-time staff to maintain. Amanda's future mother-in-law, Catherine Cooper, greeted us at the door with the kind of smile that doesn't quite reach the eyes. "Margaret, how lovely that you could join us." The subtext was clear: how unexpected, how unplanned for, how potentially disruptive. The conversation was polite at first, everyone carefully avoiding mentioning Richard's condition or my current circumstances. We discussed the weather. Hot, but this was Phoenix. What did anyone expect? We discussed the wedding preparations. Everything was coming together beautifully. The venue was perfect. The caterer was excellent. We discussed nothing of substance while eating food I couldn't taste, my stomach too knotted with anxiety to process anything beyond the social performance required. I tried to make myself small, unobtrusive, the kind of guest who doesn't cause problems. I sat in a corner with my mimosa, mostly orange juice, barely any champagne, and watched Amanda work the room. She was good at this, my daughter. Charming and poised, laughing at the right moments, touching people's arms in that casual way that suggests intimacy without demanding it. She'd gotten that from Richard, that easy social grace. I'd always been more awkward, more likely to say the wrong thing or laugh too loud. Then Amanda's cousin Jennifer arrived, late and already tipsy from whatever pre-brunch mimosas she'd consumed. Jennifer was the family mess, the one who cycled through jobs and relationships with equal instability, who showed up to events overdressed and underfiltered. She made her way through the room with a glass of champagne in each hand, air-kissing and complimenting with the enthusiasm of someone who'd already decided this was going to be fun. She zeroed in on Amanda with the inevitability of a heat-seeking missile. "Amanda, darling, you look absolutely radiant." Jennifer pulled Amanda into a hug that spilled champagne on both of them. "And you must be so excited about the new house. I drove past it yesterday. It's gorgeous. That neighborhood is so exclusive. How did you even find a place there? Everything sells before it hits the market." My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. The bite of quiche went cold and congealed while I processed what I'd just heard. "New house?" The question came out smaller than I intended, but in the sudden silence that fell over our corner of the room, it carried perfectly. Jennifer's smile faltered, her champagne-loosened awareness finally catching up to the tension she'd created. Her eyes darted between Amanda and me, confusion giving way to the terrible realization that she'd said something wrong. "The one you're buying? With the Spanish tile in the pool? The one in... Oh, God." Amanda's face went white, then red, the color climbing her neck in blotches that no amount of expensive foundation could hide. "Jennifer, this isn't the time." But it was too late. The pieces I'd been too tired and trusting to assemble suddenly clicked into place with sickening clarity. The sale of our house. $430,000. The accounts I couldn't access, supposedly being carefully managed for Richard's care. The power of attorney that gave her control over everything, used not to protect us, but to rob us. She hadn't been protecting us. She'd been stealing from us, systematically dismantling our lives to build her own. Every reassurance had been a lie. Every "don't worry, Mom" had been manipulation. Every "it's for the best" had been theft dressed up as concern. The room seemed to tilt sideways. I set down my fork very carefully, aware that everyone was watching now. The polite conversation replaced by uncomfortable silence. Other guests were starting to tune in, sensing drama the way people do at social gatherings. Cell phones were probably being positioned for recording, stories being prepared for later telling. "Where did you get the money for a house, Amanda?" My voice came out steadier than I felt, each word precisely enunciated. "Your job at the dentist's office pays well, but not that well. Not enough for a house in Paradise Valley." She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the expensive hardwood floors. "This isn't the time or place, Mom. We'll talk about this later." But I was done accepting her deflections, done being managed and postponed and told to calm down. 3 years of docility, of trusting and hoping and convincing myself that my daughter meant well. All of it burned away in the heat of sudden clarifying rage. "No, we'll talk about it now. Where's the money from our house? Where are my grandmother's things? Where is everything you promised you were protecting?" My voice was rising, and I didn't care. Let them hear. Let them all hear what my daughter had done. Diane moved closer, her hand on my elbow, steadying and supporting. Catherine Cooper looked appalled, her perfect hostess mask slipping to reveal genuine shock. Other guests had stopped even pretending to have their own conversations. We were the entertainment now, the drama that would be recounted and embellished for years. Amanda looked around at the watching faces and made a decision. "Fine. You want to do this here, in front of everyone? You're embarrassing yourself, Mom. You're confused. You're not remembering things correctly. I remember signing over power of attorney so you could help with Dad's care. I remember you promising the money from our house would be carefully managed for his medical expenses. I remember trusting you because you're my daughter, and I thought that meant something." Tears were streaming down my face now, hot and bitter. "What I don't remember is you asking my permission to buy yourself a house with money that wasn't yours. It's not like that. Then what is it like, Amanda? Explain it to me. Explain it to everyone here. Tell us how you came up with a down payment for a house in Paradise Valley on a dental hygienist's salary." Michael had appeared from somewhere, his face carefully neutral in that lawyer way that admits nothing. "Mom, you need to calm down. You're making accusations you can't prove." "Can't prove?" I laughed, and it came out harsh and broken. "I have the sale documents from our house. I have statements showing money going into accounts I can't access. I have months of you telling me everything was fine while you were spending my life savings on your own future." Diane spoke up, her voice carrying the authority of 20 years on the bench. "I'd very much like to see those accounts, Amanda. The ones you've supposedly been managing so carefully for your father's care. Shall we go over the expenditures together? I'm sure they'll all have perfectly reasonable explanations." The threat was clear. A retired judge reviewing the financial records would see through any creative accounting, any false justifications. Amanda knew it. Her face cycled through several expressions: defiance, calculation, fear, before settling on a victim's wounded innocence. "I can't believe you're doing this at my pre-wedding brunch. I've done nothing but try to help, try to make things easier for you, and this is how you repay me? With paranoid accusations and public humiliation?" Humiliation? The word stuck in my throat. "You want to talk about humiliation? You moved your father and me into a single room in an assisted living facility while you bought yourself a house with a pool. You sold our belongings for pennies while you furnished your new place with items I'll never see. You've spent months telling me I was too confused, too tired, too stressed to manage our own affairs while you stole everything we worked 42 years to build. And you're worried about being humiliated? The silence that followed was absolute. Someone's champagne glass caught the light, sending rainbow refractions across the ceiling. Outside, a bird sang, oblivious to the wreckage of my family happening inside. Catherine Cooper found her voice first. I think perhaps this gathering should end early. I'm so sorry, everyone. Obviously, there are some family matters that need private discussion. People began gathering their things with the awkward efficiency of guests escaping disaster. I heard fragments of conversation as they left. Did you hear that? And her own mother? And I always thought something was off about Amanda. The gossip mill would feast on this for months. Diane stayed with me as the room emptied. So did Michael, though he wouldn't meet my eyes. Amanda stood by the window, arms crossed, face set in lines of righteous anger. When it was just us, family and the wreckage of our relationships, Diane spoke with the calm authority of someone used to being obeyed. I'm going to say this once. Amanda, you will provide a full accounting of every cent of your parents' money by the end of this week. Bank statements, expenditures, investment records, everything. If there are any discrepancies, we will pursue legal action. Do you understand? You can't threaten me? That wasn't a threat. That was a promise. I'm a retired Superior Court judge with very good connections to the legal community, and I've seen enough financial elder abuse cases to know exactly what this looks like. You can cooperate now, or you can cooperate later through court order. Your choice. Amanda looked at Michael, seeking support or rescue. He shook his head slightly. If you've been managing everything properly, you have nothing to worry about. Just show her the records. The triumph I should have felt didn't come. Just a bone-deep weariness, and the knowledge that even if we recovered some of the money, even if Amanda faced some kind of consequences, our relationship was over. I'd lost my daughter. Not to distance or disagreement, but to her own greed and my foolish trust. I left the brunch with Diane, leaving Amanda and Michael to face Catherine Cooper's wrath alone. In the car, I finally broke completely, sobbing with the ugly intensity of someone who'd been holding it together too long. I raised her, I said between gasps. I taught her right from wrong. I gave her everything I had. How did she become this? Diane had no answer, just steady presence and tissues from her glove compartment and the promise that we'd fight this together. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the narrow bed in our assisted living room, listening to Richard's labored breathing, and stared at the water-stained ceiling tiles. The room was dark except for the green glow of the digital clock. 3:17 a.m., then 3:42, then 4:03. Sleep felt impossible, like a luxury from a previous life. At some point around 3 in the morning, I got up and looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. The harsh fluorescent light showed every flaw with clinical precision. The woman staring back was barely recognizable. Sunken eyes circled by bruised dark shadows that makeup couldn't hide. Cheeks hollowed from stress and skipped meals. I couldn't remember the last time food had tasted like anything other than obligation. Hair gone completely gray and lifeless, thin enough that I could see scalp showing through in places. The skin of my neck hung loose, crepe-like. My shoulders curved forward in a permanent posture of defeat. When had I become this person? I used to take pride in my appearance, used to stand straight and meet the world with confidence. I'd been pretty once, not beautiful, but pretty enough. Richard used to say I had kind eyes and a smile that made people want to tell me their secrets. I'd had friends who called just to chat, a career as a school librarian that I'd loved, hobbies and interests beyond mere survival. Now I looked like something discarded, used up, thrown away, like one of the items from our estate sale that nobody wanted, that ended up in the free box at the end of the day. The mirror showed me the truth I'd been avoiding. I'd been erased. Not just our home and possessions, but me, my identity, my worth. I'd become a shadow in my own life, a supporting character in a story that was supposed to be mine. My daughter had taken everything that mattered and repackaged it as her own future, while I withered away in a room that smelled like industrial cleaner and defeat. That reflection broke something in me. Or maybe it fixed something. Because for the first time in months, I felt something other than exhaustion and despair. I felt rage. Cold, clarifying rage that burned away the fog of denial I'd been living in. I'd spent 3 years being accommodating, understanding, trusting. 3 years accepting explanations and believing promises, and making excuses for behavior that had no excuse. 3 years disappearing piece by piece while telling myself it was necessary, it was helpful, it was for the best. I was done disappearing. I went back to bed but didn't sleep. Instead, I made plans. Lists in my head of things I needed to do, people I needed to contact, evidence I needed to gather. When the sun finally rose and light began filtering through our thin curtains, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Purpose. Help came from an unexpected place. The assisted living facility ran a support group for caregivers, and I'd been attending sporadically, mostly to get out of our room for an hour. The group met every Tuesday evening in the common room, a circle of folding chairs around a table perpetually stocked with stale cookies and weak coffee. The group was led by a woman named Patricia, a retired nurse whose husband had died from Alzheimer's 3 years earlier. She had this way of seeing through bullshit, of cutting through the polite euphemisms we all use to describe our suffering. While other people talked about their challenges and difficult journeys, Patricia called it what it was: slow-motion loss, grief stretched out over years, love tested past any reasonable breaking point. She noticed when I showed up to the meeting after the brunch, my eyes still swollen from crying, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold my coffee cup. After the session, she pulled me aside. "Your daughter is robbing you blind, isn't she?" The bluntness of it shocked me into honesty. I told her everything: the power of attorney, the sold house, the mysterious new property Amanda was buying. Patricia didn't look surprised. If anything, she looked grimly vindicated. "You're not the first person I've seen go through this," she said, steering me toward a quiet corner of the lobby. "Family betrayal in elder care is more common than anyone wants to admit. We don't talk about it because it's ugly and uncomfortable and makes people question whether their own children might be capable of the same thing." She invited me for coffee at a diner down the street, a real diner, not the facility cafeteria with its institutional food and depressing lighting. We drove there in her ancient Volvo, and I felt something loosen in my chest just from being out in the world, making a choice about where to go and what to do. The diner was a relic from the 1950s, all red vinyl booths and chrome accents. We slid into a booth near the back, and Patricia ordered us coffee and pie without asking what I wanted. The pie came, cherry, with a lattice crust that reminded me of the ones I used to make with Amanda. That's where she told me her own story. Her son had done something similar, convinced her to sign over control of her late husband's life insurance payout, promising to invest it for her retirement. "Smart investments," he'd said. "Index funds, bonds, diversified portfolio. I've got a financial advisor who can help." She'd trusted him because he was her son, because he worked in finance, because she was overwhelmed with grief and didn't want to make decisions. Instead, he'd bought himself a boat, a 42-foot yacht he named after his father, as if that made the theft sentimental instead of criminal. He'd also purchased a vacation condo in Sedona. By the time Patricia realized what was happening, there was barely $20,000 left of the $300,000 policy. "I got a lawyer and fought back," she said, stirring cream into her coffee with controlled fury. The spoon clinked against the ceramic with sharp, precise sounds. It took 2 years and most of what was left of my money, but I got enough back to live with dignity. More importantly, I got my power back, my agency, my right to make decisions about my own life. She paused, looking at me with an intensity that made me want to look away. That's what they take from you, not just the money, though that's real and it matters. They take your sense that you have any say in what happens to you. They make you doubt yourself, question your own perceptions, feel like you're the problem for not being grateful enough for their help. It's psychological abuse dressed up as caregiving. The words hit me like a diagnosis I'd been waiting years to hear. Yes, that was exactly it. She became my ally, my survivor sister in this awful club no one wants to join. We started meeting weekly at that same diner, always the same booth, always the same order, coffee and whatever pie was fresh that day. Sometimes we talked about our situations, sometimes about other things entirely, but I always left feeling less alone, less crazy, more certain that what had been done to me was real and wrong. Patricia introduced me to others who'd been through similar betrayals. She'd been building a network for years, people who'd lost money, homes, autonomy to family members who saw elder care as an opportunity instead of a responsibility. There was Margaret, not to be confused with me, though we joked about being the Margaret Club. She was in her 70s, sharp as ever, with white hair she wore in a crown of braids. Her daughter had sold her house and pocketed the money while claiming it went to nursing home fees. Except Margaret had never been in a nursing home. She'd been living with her son in California, completely unaware that her daughter had executed a power of attorney, sold the family home in Phoenix, and vanished with the proceeds. I only found out when I tried to move back and discovered someone else living in my house, Margaret told us at one of the coffee meetings Patricia organized. New owners, nice couple, had no idea the house had been sold illegally. My daughter forged documents saying I had severe dementia and couldn't make decisions for myself. Forged a doctor's signature. The whole thing. There was Robert, whose son had emptied his retirement accounts and left him destitute. Robert had worked 40 years as an engineer for Boeing, saved diligently, invested carefully. He'd been looking forward to retirement, to traveling with his wife, to finally having time for all the projects and hobbies he'd deferred. Then his wife died suddenly, an aneurysm, no warning. Just gone one morning when she didn't wake up. His son had stepped in during his grief, offering to help manage the finances. Until you're back on your feet, Dad. Within 6 months, $400,000 in retirement accounts had been transferred to the son's name and spent on a business venture that immediately failed. He said it was a sure thing, Robert said, his voice still holding disbelief years later. Said he'd double the money, that we'd both benefit. I believed him because he's my son. What kind of father suspects his own son of theft? Each story was a variation on the same theme, family exploiting the vulnerable, using love and trust as weapons. The details varied, but the pattern was consistent. Establish control through legal means. Isolate the victim from outside support. Systematically extract assets while maintaining the fiction of caregiving. Together, we started what Patricia called our Truth Campaign, sharing our stories and warning others about the signs of financial abuse. We spoke at senior centers, community meetings, any place that would have us. Patricia made flyers listing warning signs. Children pushing for immediate power of attorney. Pressure to sell property or consolidate accounts. Decisions made without consultation. Isolation from friends and other family. Evasive answers about finances. Being made to feel confused or incompetent. We handed out these flyers to anyone who'd take them. Most people glanced and threw them away, couldn't imagine their families would ever. But some people looked at those lists with dawning recognition. Some people pulled us aside after presentations to share their own stories, to ask what they should do, to seek hope that there might be a way out. Patricia helped me understand something I should have known all along. Research reveals that 20% of family caregivers of people with dementia admitted to neglect. 20%. 1 in 5. And that's just the ones willing to admit it in anonymous surveys. The real number is likely higher. Much higher. We're not talking about strangers or criminals with rap sheets. We're talking about sons and daughters, people who were raised with love and advantage, who should know better. People who'd been taught right from wrong, who'd been given every opportunity, who'd never known real hardship or need. And yet, when presented with access to their parents' assets and an aging parent too tired or confused to monitor closely, 20% chose exploitation over care. The statistics made me feel less alone and more horrified at the same time. My daughter wasn't an aberration, wasn't some unique monster. She was part of a pattern, a symptom of something rotten in how we treat our aging parents, in how we value people based on their productivity and independence. The hard part, Patricia said during one of our coffee sessions, is that most people don't want to believe it happens. They can't imagine their own children being capable of it, so they ignore the warning signs, make excuses, convince themselves there must be a reasonable explanation. By the time they realize what's happening, it's often too late to do anything about it. She was right. I'd wasted months in denial, telling myself there must be a reasonable explanation, that I was being paranoid or ungrateful. Meanwhile, Amanda had systematically stripped away everything Richard and I had built over 4 decades of marriage. But now I had allies. Now I had people who believed me, who understood because they'd lived it too. We started planning. Not revenge exactly, but accountability. Patricia connected me with a lawyer who specialized in elder financial abuse. A woman named Sarah Chen, no relation, who'd built her practice on cases like mine. Sarah met with me at her office, a small suite in a building that had seen better days. But her credentials were solid, her reputation excellent, and she worked on contingency for elder abuse cases, which was good because I had almost no money left for legal fees. We began documenting everything. Sarah helped me request account statements from the banks. I had a right to see them even if Amanda controlled access. We gathered records of the house sale, contacted the estate sale company for receipts, requested medical records showing Richard's condition and treatment timeline. We built a case piece by piece. It felt good to fight back, to stop being passive in my own destruction, to stop accepting and start demanding, to reclaim some small measure of agency. But even as we gathered evidence, Sarah was careful to manage my expectations. "This is going to be hard," she warned me during one meeting. "Your daughter was smart about how she did this. She has legal power of attorney, properly executed. The house sale was legitimate. The money went into accounts established for your husband's care. Even if she's not using it the way she promised, proving misuse is difficult. So she just gets away with it?" The injustice burned in my throat. Maybe, maybe not. It depends on what we can prove about her intent and whether we can demonstrate that she's breached her fiduciary duty as your attorney in fact. But you need to be prepared for the possibility that even if we're right, even if everything you've told me is true, the law might not offer the remedy you want. I understood what she wasn't quite saying. Amanda might have stolen from us within the bounds of the law, using legal tools designed to protect vulnerable people, to instead exploit them. And if she'd been careful enough, clever enough, there might be nothing anyone could do about it. The housewarming party was announced via a family group text I was somehow still included in. I'd been waiting for Amanda to remove me from the group chat. We hadn't spoken since the disastrous brunch 3 weeks earlier, but my name remained on the list, still receiving updates about family events I was no longer welcome at. Housewarming this Saturday at the new place, casual dress, bring a dish to share. The message included the address, a street in Paradise Valley I recognized as one of the most expensive neighborhoods in Phoenix. There was a photo attached, a sprawling Spanish colonial-style home, white stucco with terracotta tiles, arched windows, and mature landscaping. In the background, I could see the edge of what looked like a pool. I stared at that photo for a long time. This was what my life had bought. That was where my grandmother's china had ended up, liquidated into down payment money. That was what 42 years of marriage and careful saving had become, a backdrop for Amanda's Instagram perfect life. I showed the message to Patricia at our next coffee meeting. "Are you going?" she asked. I wasn't invited, not really. That message was to everyone. Amanda probably forgot to remove me from the group. Or she wants you to know what she bought with your money, wants to rub your face in it. The thought hadn't occurred to me, but it rang true. There was a cruelty to including me in that message, to showing me the house, to the casual assumption that I'd either not notice or not care that my stolen life was being celebrated. "I'm going," I decided, "with you, and with documentation of every cent that should still be in those accounts." Patricia's smile was fierce. "Now you're talking." I showed up uninvited on Saturday afternoon, bringing nothing but questions and Patricia's steady presence beside me. Sarah had advised against confrontation. "Let me handle this through legal channels," she'd said, but I was done letting other people handle my life. The house was even more stunning in person. Sprawling didn't cover it. The place was probably 4,000 square feet, maybe more. Spanish colonial architecture with terracotta tiles and arched doorways, mature palm trees in the landscaping, a 3-car garage. The pool I'd glimpsed in the photo stretched across most of the backyard, its surface glittering turquoise in the afternoon sun. I knew what our house had sold for, $430,000, minus fees. Even with both Amanda and her fiancé's incomes, even with perfect credit and a generous mortgage, this property was out of reach. Unless you had a large down payment. Unless you'd stolen it from your parents, the numbers didn't add up unless you factored in theft. Amanda answered the door with a champagne flute in hand, wearing a dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent at the assisted living facility. Her smile froze when she saw me, hardening into something brittle and dangerous. "Mom, I didn't think you'd come." "Clearly." I walked past her into the foyer, marble floors that gleamed in the afternoon light, a chandelier hanging from the 2-story ceiling that probably cost more than our first car. Real estate flyers in my head priced it, $700,000 minimum, maybe $8, maybe more depending on the size of the lot and recent renovations. Guests mingled in clusters throughout the house, laughing, admiring the decor, drinking from expensive glassware. I recognized a few faces. Michael, of course, carefully avoiding eye contact. Some of Amanda's co-workers from the dental practice. Her fiancé, Bradley, holding court near the fireplace with what looked like his parents. The noise level dropped noticeably as I moved through the space, conversations stuttering and stopping as people recognized that something uncomfortable was happening. Patricia stayed close, her hand occasionally brushing my elbow in silent support. "We need to talk," I said, my voice carrying more than I intended. The nearby conversation ceased entirely. Amanda's face flushed. "Not here," she hissed, trying to steer me toward a side room, her hand gripping my arm hard enough to bruise. "This is my home, my celebration." But I'd spent months being managed and manipulated, being steered away from confrontation, being told not here and not now, and let's discuss this later. I was done being convenient. I pulled my arm free and raised my voice loud enough that everyone could hear. "Yes, here, right now. I want to know where the money for this house came from." The room went silent except for the background music, some smooth jazz playlist that suddenly seemed obscene in its cheerfulness. Cell phones were already out, probably recording. Let them. Let this be witnessed. Amanda looked around at the watching faces, calculating her options. She settled on indignant. "That's incredibly rude, Mom. This is my home, my celebration, and you show up uninvited to make wild accusations. Bought with my home, my life savings." I turned to address the room full of strangers and people who barely knew me. My daughter convinced me to sell the house I'd lived in for 40 years, promising the money would go to my husband's medical care. $430,000. Instead, she bought herself this. I gestured at the expensively decorated space around us. The silence was absolute now. Someone dropped a cracker, and it hit the marble floor with a sound like a gunshot. "You're confused," Amanda said, her voice tight with barely controlled fury. "You signed everything over voluntarily because you couldn't manage Dad's care alone. You were overwhelmed. You were making mistakes with his medications. You couldn't handle the finances. We've been over this. I signed it over because you lied to me, because I trusted you, because I was your mother and I thought that meant something." My hands were shaking, but my voice stayed steady. Years of rage and betrayal were channeling themselves into cold, precise words. "I thought you were helping me. I didn't realize you were stealing from me until it was too late." Patricia stepped closer, a silent show of support. Several guests had their phones out now, definitely recording. This would be all over social media by tonight. Amanda's perfect housewarming party, ruined by her inconvenient mother making uncomfortable accusations. Michael finally spoke up, stepping forward with his lawyer face firmly in place. "Mom, do you have any proof of these accusations? Because what you're describing sounds like slander. You signed legal documents giving Amanda power of attorney. The sale of the house was properly executed. If you're now having regrets about decisions you made—" "Decisions I made?" I laughed, and it came out bitter. "I made decisions based on lies. Amanda told me the money would be carefully managed for Dad's care, that it would be invested, protected, available when we needed it. She didn't tell me she was going to use it to buy herself a house that costs more than a dental hygienist makes in a decade." I pulled out the folder Patricia had helped me compile: bank records, sale documents, receipts. Sarah had advised against showing my hand too early, but I was past caring about legal strategy. I wanted truth, and I wanted it witnessed. I have proof that our house sold for $430,000. I have proof that the assisted living facility costs $2,000 a month, which should leave plenty even after a year and a half. And I have the address of this house, which I'm guessing costs significantly more than what's supposedly left in the accounts I'm told I have access to, but somehow can't actually access. I set the folder on Amanda's expensive glass coffee table with enough force that several guests jumped. "I want a full accounting of where every penny went. I want statements from every account. I want receipts for every expenditure you've made on my behalf. And I want it by the end of the week, or my lawyer is filing a complaint for financial elder abuse." The room erupted in whispers. Amanda's face went from red to white, all the blood draining away as she realized her carefully constructed facade was cracking. Her champagne flute was trembling in her hand, the golden liquid inside sloshing dangerously close to spilling. Bradley moved to her side, clearly confused about what was happening. "Amanda? What's she talking about?" Amanda ignored him, her eyes locked on mine with an intensity that would have frightened me months ago. Now, it just made me sad. When had my daughter become someone who could look at me with such hatred? "You wouldn't," she said, her voice dropping low. "You're just upset. You're confused because of the stress." "I'm completely clear," I interrupted. "Clearer than I've been in months. You stole from your father and me. You took everything we worked for and used it to build your perfect life while we rot in a facility we can barely afford. And you did it because you thought I was too weak, too tired, too trusting to fight back." The tears came now, hot, angry tears that felt like release. I didn't bother wiping them away. Let everyone see. Let them see what my daughter had done to me. "You were wrong. I'm fighting back, and I don't care if it takes every cent I have left, every ounce of energy I can muster. I'm going to make sure everyone knows what you did." Patricia's hand found mine, squeezing hard. Moral support and shared fury, and the promise that I wasn't alone in this. Catherine Cooper appeared from somewhere, her hostess mask completely gone, replaced by genuine shock and disgust. "I think everyone should leave. Now." Her voice carried the authority of someone used to being obeyed. "Amanda, we'll talk about this later. In private." The guests began gathering their things, whispering urgently to each other, no doubt already texting friends about the drama they'd just witnessed. I heard fragments as they passed. Can you believe? Her own mother. I always knew something was off. Did you get video? Amanda stood frozen in her perfect living room in her perfect house, watching her perfect life unravel in real time. Michael looked sick, his lawyer composure finally cracking. Bradley looked bewildered, like he'd stumbled into someone else's nightmare. I picked up my folder and walked toward the door, Patricia beside me. As I passed Amanda, I stopped. I loved you, I said, quietly enough that only she could hear. I would have given you anything if you'd just asked. You didn't have to steal it. You didn't have to lie and manipulate and gaslight me into thinking I was losing my mind. You could have just asked. Her face crumpled, but I didn't stay to watch. I'd said what I came to say, done what I came to do. The rest was up to lawyers and judges and whatever passed for justice in situations like this. In the car, Patricia let me cry it out. Ugly, gasping sobs that came from somewhere deep and wounded. She didn't offer platitudes or false comfort, just tissues and presence and the understanding that comes from having lived through similar betrayal. You were brave in there, she said finally. I was angry. Same thing sometimes. Studies show that psychological abuse in dementia ranges from 28 to 62% of cases. 28 to 62%. I became part of that statistic without even recognizing it was happening. The manipulation, the gaslighting, the systematic isolation, it all fell under the umbrella of abuse. But I'd been too close to see the pattern. Amanda had been psychologically battering me for months, using my exhaustion and confusion against me, making me doubt my own perceptions and memories. Every time I questioned something, she had an explanation that made me feel foolish for asking. Every time I pushed back, she reminded me how overwhelmed I was, how I needed help, how she was only trying to support me. It was abuse dressed up as caregiving, control disguised as concern, theft packaged as protection. Standing in her stolen house, confronting her in front of witnesses, I finally understood the full scope of what she'd done. This wasn't just about money or property. It was about power and control, about reducing me to nothing so she could take everything. It was about making me so small, so doubt-filled, so ground down that I wouldn't fight back even when I realized what was happening. And the worst part, she was going to get away with it. Sarah delivered the news 2 weeks after the housewarming confrontation. We met at her office, and I could tell from her expression before she even started talking that it wasn't good news. The lawyer Patricia connected me with reviewed everything with professional gentleness, the kind of careful tone doctors use when delivering terminal diagnoses. Legally, she didn't do anything wrong. You signed power of attorney voluntarily. There's no evidence of coercion or undue influence. The sale of the house was executed properly, with all necessary documentation. The fact that she used the proceeds in ways you didn't anticipate or approve doesn't constitute fraud in the eyes of the law, especially since some of the money did go to your husband's care. It felt like being punched in the stomach, all the air leaving my lungs at once. So she can just steal everything and walk away? I'm sorry. Without evidence that she coerced you or that you were mentally incompetent when you signed the papers, there's no case. And given that your husband has dementia but you don't, proving incompetence would be nearly impossible. You signed the documents. The sale was legal. The power of attorney was properly executed. Sarah pulled out the bank statements we'd finally forced Amanda to produce. She did spend some money on your care, the assisted living facility, some medical expenses. It's not the majority of the funds, but it's enough that she can argue she was using the money for its intended purpose. What about the house? What about using my money to buy herself a house? She didn't buy the house outright. She and her fiancé have a mortgage. We can't prove that the down payment came from your accounts. She could argue it was savings, or Bradley's money, or a gift from his family. Without direct evidence of funds transferring from your accounts to the house purchase, it's just speculation. The rage I'd felt at the housewarming curdled into something colder. Despair mixed with helplessness, the bitter understanding that sometimes people do terrible things and face no consequences because they're careful enough to stay within the technical bounds of the law. Amanda had been smart, covering her tracks, making sure every legal requirement was technically met. She'd robbed us within the bounds of the law, using tools designed to protect vulnerable people to instead exploit them. And there was nothing I could do about it. What if we took it to court anyway? I asked, grasping at anything. What if we made enough noise that she had to explain herself publicly? Sarah shook her head gently. It would cost more money than you have. Legal fees for this kind of case could easily run $30,000–$40,000. And even if you spent every penny and won, which is unlikely, you'd probably only recover a fraction of what's gone. Plus, Amanda could countersue for defamation, claim you're mentally unstable, drag this out for years. She leaned forward, her expression sympathetic but firm. I know this isn't what you want to hear, but sometimes the most strategic choice is to cut your losses, revoke the power of attorney so she can't do any more damage, and focus on rebuilding what you can with what's left. It was good advice, practical, strategic, designed to minimize further harm. But it meant letting Amanda win. It meant accepting that she'd stolen from us and would face no consequences beyond social embarrassment at a housewarming party. I left Sarah's office feeling hollowed out. The fight I'd been ready for, the court battle I'd imagined where truth and justice would prevail, none of that was going to happen. Just the quiet acknowledgement that my daughter had betrayed me and the law didn't care. Amanda kept the house. She kept whatever money was left from the sale of ours. She married her fiancé in a ceremony I wasn't invited to, not that I would have gone. The wedding pictures showed up on social media. Amanda radiant in white, Bradley handsome in his tux, surrounded by friends and family. No mother of the bride in sight. Michael sent me a text afterward, a half-hearted attempt at bridge building that felt more like obligation than genuine regret. I hope you know I never wanted things to turn out this way. I was just trying to help. Maybe someday we can all move past this. I didn't respond. What was there to say? That he'd helped Amanda steal from us? That he'd stood by and watched it happen? That helping doesn't mean enabling theft and then claiming neutrality when the truth comes out? The lawyer bills ate through what little I had saved separately. Between Sarah's fees, discounted but still substantial, and the costs of gathering documentation and fighting for access to account statements, I spent thousands of dollars to learn that I had no legal recourse. Money I desperately needed for Richard's care, gone in pursuit of justice that didn't exist. I had to accept that I'd never see justice in any official capacity. No courtroom drama, no judge ordering restitution, no public vindication. Just the quiet knowledge that my daughter had betrayed me and would face no consequences for it, beyond some awkward social moments and strained family relationships. But here's the thing about peace. Sometimes it comes not from getting what you deserve, but from letting go of what you can't control. I couldn't force Amanda to feel remorse or return what she'd taken. I couldn't make the legal system care about moral wrongs that aren't technical crimes. I couldn't undo the signatures I'd placed on documents I didn't fully understand. What I could do was refuse to let her theft define the rest of my life. I could choose to stop fighting battles I couldn't win and start building something new from the rubble she'd left behind. Patricia helped me apply for aid programs I didn't know existed, resources for seniors dealing with financial abuse, supplemental security income, housing assistance, food stamps, programs I'd never imagined needing, that I'd always associated with other people less fortunate or less prepared than Richard and I had been. But now, I was one of those people, impoverished by my daughter's greed and my own misplaced trust. Swallowing pride wasn't optional anymore. It was survival. It wasn't much, but it was enough to move Richard and me into a slightly better facility, one with actual windows that let in natural light and staff who seemed to care about residents as people instead of just bodies to process. The room was still small, but it had a view of a garden where I could sit and watch birds at the feeder. I started attending the support group not as a victim seeking help, but as someone who could help others recognize the warning signs I'd missed. I told my story, the whole thing. From the first request for power of attorney, to the confrontation at the housewarming party, to the lawyer's explanation that nothing illegal had occurred. People listened. Some cried. Some shared their own stories of family betrayal. Some thanked me for the warning, promising they'd be more careful, more skeptical, more protective of their autonomy, even when help seemed sincere. And slowly, I built something that felt like peace, not happiness exactly, that seemed too far out of reach, too tainted by everything I'd lost. But peace, the kind that comes from knowing you survived, that you're still here despite everything designed to erase you. Do you think that was fair? I don't. I think my daughter should have faced consequences for what she did, should have had to return what she stole, should have felt the weight of her choices in some tangible way. But fairness isn't guaranteed in this life. Sometimes the people who hurt us most walk away unscathed while we're left to rebuild from rubble. Tell me in the comments, what would you have done in my place? Would you have kept fighting, spent your last dime on lawyers and appeals, dragged the case through courts for years even knowing you'd probably lose? Or would you have made the same choice I did, accepting that some battles can't be won and finding peace anyway? I moved us 6 months after the confrontation. Not far, just across Phoenix to a neighborhood I'd always liked, near a park with walking trails and a community center that offered free classes. The new apartment was small but mine, paid for with disability support and what I could scrape together from part-time work at a local library reshelving books. Richard's condition had worsened to the point where he needed memory care, and I visited him every day, reading to him from books he used to love, even though he rarely recognized me anymore. Sometimes he'd smile at the sound of my voice, and I'd tell myself that was enough, that these small moments of connection mattered even if he couldn't remember them 5 minutes later. It was a smaller life than the one I'd imagined, stripped of the comfort and security I'd thought we'd earned. But it was honest. No one was stealing from me here. No one was manipulating or gaslighting or using my love as a weapon. I'd traded prosperity for autonomy, and most days that felt like a fair exchange. I started volunteering with Patricia's support network, sharing my story at community centers and senior facilities, warning others about the signs I'd ignored. If your children suddenly want power of attorney, ask why. I'd tell rooms full of worried faces, some skeptical, some already nodding with recognition. If they're pushing you to sell your home or consolidate accounts, get a second opinion from someone who has no financial stake in the outcome. If they're making decisions without consulting you, that's not help, that's control. Some people listened. Others insisted their children would never, could never, weren't capable of such betrayal. I understood. I'd been one of them, blind until it was too late. But I kept talking anyway, hoping that someone might hear and protect themselves before they lost everything like I had. Before I close this story, I want to share something important I learned through all of this, something I wish someone had taught me before I signed away my rights and my future, something that might save you or someone you love from the same fate. Legal protection isn't just about having the right documents. It's about understanding what those documents actually do and who they give power to. When I signed power of attorney to Amanda, I thought I was giving her the ability to help me manage things. What I actually did was give her complete legal authority to act in my place, to make decisions I couldn't override, to control assets I no longer had access to. That's a terrifying amount of power to hand anyone, even someone you trust, especially someone you trust, because trust makes you less likely to question or monitor their actions. Here's what I learned too late. Power of attorney comes in different forms. There's medical power of attorney, which only covers healthcare decisions. Who can talk to your doctors? Who can make choices about treatment if you're incapacitated? There's financial power of attorney, which is what I signed. The nuclear option that gave Amanda access to everything. Bank accounts, investments, property, the authority to buy and sell in my name. And there's what's called a springing power of attorney, which only activates under specific circumstances, like if you're declared mentally incompetent by a doctor. I gave Amanda general financial power of attorney with no restrictions, no oversight, no requirements that she consult me or report her actions. That was my mistake. A catastrophic, life-destroying mistake that I'll pay for until the day I die. If you're considering giving someone power of attorney, and sometimes it's necessary, especially as you age or if you're dealing with a medical crisis, please understand what you're signing. Work with an independent lawyer, not one your family recommends, not one your children bring to your house with documents already prepared. An independent lawyer who represents your interests, not your family's. Ask questions. What exactly can this person do with this authority? How is it limited? What oversight exists? Can you revoke it if circumstances change? Are there restrictions on large transactions? Is there a requirement for regular accounting of how money is spent? And here's the most important thing, the lesson I learned too late to save myself. Just because someone is family doesn't mean they should have this power. Blood doesn't equal trustworthiness. Love doesn't preclude exploitation. In fact, family members are the most common perpetrators of financial elder abuse precisely because they have access and trust that outsiders don't. I thought blood meant loyalty, that raising and loving my children guaranteed their good intentions. I was wrong. The statistics bear this out. Financial abuse of elders is most commonly committed by family members, not strangers. Adult children, spouses, even grandchildren. People who stand to inherit, who feel entitled to assets they didn't earn, who rationalize theft as just getting my share early, or protecting the estate, or they won't need it anyway. If you're going to grant power of attorney, choose someone with no financial interest in your assets. A trusted friend, a professional fiduciary, a lawyer who specializes in elder care. And build in safeguards. Require dual signatures for large transactions, mandatory annual accountings, oversight from a third party. Make it hard for anyone to abuse the power you're granting them. I also learned about something called a living trust, which can protect your assets even if you become incapacitated. Unlike power of attorney, a trust has built-in oversight and restrictions. You establish rules about how assets can be used, who has access, what requires approval from multiple parties. It's more expensive to set up, requires a lawyer, involves more complexity than a simple power of attorney. But it might have saved me from what happened. These are things I wish I'd known, questions I wish I'd asked. I thought I was being practical and responsible by letting my children help manage things. Instead, I was being naive, trusting in a relationship that no longer existed in the form I remembered. My daughter saw an opportunity and took it, using legal tools designed to protect vulnerable people to instead exploit one. She used my trust against me, weaponized my exhaustion, turned my love into leverage for theft. Don't let that happen to you. Educate yourself about your legal rights and protections before crisis hits, before you're too tired or overwhelmed to think clearly. Ask the uncomfortable questions now, while you still have the mental and emotional bandwidth to process the answers. Insist on transparency and oversight, even if it offends people, especially if it offends people, because that offense might be a sign they were counting on your blind trust. And if something feels wrong, if your children are pushing too hard, making decisions without you, isolating you from other advisors, getting defensive when you ask questions, trust that instinct. You're not being paranoid. You're not being ungrateful. You're protecting yourself from a betrayal that's far more common than anyone wants to admit. Your autonomy, your assets, your right to make decisions about your own life, these things are worth protecting. They're worth the awkwardness of questioning your children's motives. They're worth the expense of independent legal advice. They're worth the effort of setting up safeguards that might never be needed. Because once you sign that power of attorney, once you hand over control, Getting it back is nearly impossible, and by the time you realize it's being abused, the damage is already done. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this story. I know it wasn't easy to hear, and it wasn't easy to live through. But I'm telling it because I believe stories like mine need to be told, need to be heard, need to serve as warnings for others who might be walking the same path I did without realizing where it leads. If you connected with what I shared today, if you saw yourself or someone you love in my experience, please take a moment to leave a like. It helps these stories reach the people who need them most, helps push them up in algorithms so they might save someone from making the same mistakes I did. And I'd love to know, where are you listening from right now? What city? What time of day? Are you going through something similar? Or did this story open your eyes to warning signs you hadn't noticed before? Drop a comment and let me know. This community thrives on shared experiences and mutual support. You're not alone, even when it feels like you are. What would you have done in my place? Would you have kept fighting through the legal system, hoping for justice that might never come? Or would you have made peace with the loss and focused on rebuilding? There's no right answer, but I'd genuinely like to hear your perspective. Sometimes sharing these experiences helps us all make sense of the senseless things that happen in life. If you found value in this story, please subscribe to this channel. There are more stories like mine, more warnings and lessons from people who've survived betrayals and come out the other side. Not all of them end neatly. Not all of them have justice or happy endings. But they're all true, and they all matter, and they all offer something. Whether it's warning, validation, or just the comfort of knowing you're not alone in your pain. Before you go, I want to recommend 2 other stories you might find helpful. There's one about a woman whose sister stole her inheritance through forged documents, and another about a man whose children committed him to a nursing home against his will to access his pension.